Okay. All right. The other thing before we get started, just a reminder related to COVID. If you are showing symptoms or if you're in contact with somebody that's tested positive, make sure that you contact the Office of Student Life. Kyle Chamberlain, he's the director of Student Life, and he will work with you on the procedures for that, and also contact all of your instructors for all of your different classes, and we'll work with you regarding that. So again, there's more information online on that website that I have on kind of the very top of Canvas if you have any questions regarding that. Okay, looks like we got most everybody here. We were having some issues with Zoom this morning. The university was having some issues where we couldn't log in through the website, but it looks like most of it is working now, so we should be in good shape. If you do ever have any issues with Zoom, if you're having trouble logging in or anything, just shoot me a text message or shoot me an email, and we'll work to get that figured out. Okay, so this week we're gonna kind of get started with some coding, and chapter 2 is kind of the first step here. We're gonna talk about HTML and how we basically format our pages to get them to work in a web browser properly. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. First thing I'm going to do is walk through some slides with you and talk about some terminology. And then depending on how much time we have, we might get into some coding today. Most likely we're going to do most of that on Wednesday. So this PowerPoint. Okay. Okay, so chapter 2. All right, so this is the first step. We're just going to cover some of our HTML basics. All right, so these are kind of the learning objectives here. We'll cover most of this in the slides. All right, so HTML, you've all heard of it. Hypertext Markup Language is what that stands for. And it's really what it is. It's a set of markup symbols or codes that are placed and kind of configured into a file that is intended to display that information and content on a web browser page, okay? So this is basically what we're doing is we're formatting our code into a way that web browsers can read it and display it visually, okay? Whether it's on a excuse me, mobile phone or a desktop. All right. And so the W3C really sets the standards for HTML and all of kind of the related languages like CSS, JavaScript, things like that. So you can always go to that site to read more information about all those standards. Sorry, I got a few more students that are coming into the Zoom and get those admitted. Okay. All right. I think I got everybody in here that was in the waiting room. Okay. Excuse me. All right. So the HTML elements. So each of the markup code that we'll be working with represents what we call an HTML element. So like the paragraph is an element. You know, headings, different things like that. They're all elements. And so each of those elements really has a purpose, and that's kind of to format the page, the HTML, the web page that we're, you know, trying to put together. So each of those elements really has a purpose. Most of those elements are coded as a pair of what we call tags. So there's an opening tag and a closing tag. And those are, when we're typing the code, we use those with angle brackets. Okay, so they look like greater than, less than signs. Those are on the keyboard, kind of right to the right side of the letter M. And all these elements we'll put inside these angle brackets. So what kind of our current state of affairs, we're using HTML5. So this is the newest version of HTML. It's supported by all of the modern web browsers. Okay, it's intended to be backwards compatible. And so it's added some new elements, some new functionality, stuff like form data, native video and audio support for a lot of different file formats, different things like that. So that W3C, they're always working to improve the standards, to make everything more accessible, make it work well on phones, because more and more that's kind of the primary source that most consumers are using to view web pages is through mobile. Okay, so HTML5 really for the most part works really well with you know, all the mobile browsers you know, that you see on your Android phones and your iPhones with Safari. So HTML5 is what we're going to be programming in for this course. A document type definition, DTD. This is basically what it's telling you what version of HTML we're using. This is always placed at the top of a web document. So an example here. So the first one there is kind of an older version. What we'll do on all of our pages, that second one there, the HTML5, it's just exclamation doc type space HTML with inside those brackets. And that just tells the web browser that we're using HTML5 for the information on that page. All right, so this is a super simple example of a web page. Right, so we start out there with that first line with the docutype, telling we're using HTML5. The second one there, we're using English as our language. Then we have our head section. Okay, so this is like where our title of our web page goes. And so you can kind of see within those brackets, we have an opening tag for title. And then we have our content in there. So page title would go there. And that's going to be usually displayed within like that top bar of a web browser. And then we have our closing tag. And you'll see that we use that backslash there right before title. And that lets the browser know that that's the end of that element. The next one is the character set. Okay, so the Unitype, the 8, UTF-8 is kind of the standard. All the pages that you'll be doing will use that character set. And so then we go and you'll see we have the closing tag there for the head section. All right, so that's the head section is usually where we'll place like title, any kind of metadata, so like keywords, things like that will go in the head section. When we get into our CSS, we'll place that in the head section there as well. The body, so then we go into the body part of the page. Okay, this is where the content will show up. And so when we start typing, you know, the text, the graphics, all that good stuff will go within the body section there. And then we have our closing HTML tag. And so that is kind of like the very end. That just tells the browser that that's the end of the content and the data for that page. All right, so like I said, the head section, that's the information that describes the web document, okay? And then the body section, that contains all of our text and different elements that are going to display visually within the web page. All right, so this is kind of just another example, a visual example here. So if this was typed up in like Notepad, you can kind of see the code there on the top part. And then if you opened up a browser page, this is what you would see. You kind of see there in that tab, my first HTML5 web page, kind of in the top part of the window there. And then hello world, that's just the content. So you can see between the two body tags, we have that text hello world. And so that shows up visually within the browser. All right, so this is super, like I said, super simple example. Once we get into more elements here, things we'll be adding a lot more content. But this is really, I mean, when you think about it, this is the main structure of a page. Everything's going either within the head section or the body section. Okay. All right, so we talked about I talked about headings. So headings are there's like it's kind of by default the browsers will display these. Each browser will be a little bit different. So like the heading level 1 might look just a tad different in like say Firefox versus what it would look like in Google Chrome or Apple Safari browser. So, but for the most part, it's going to be pretty standard. Okay, so like our H1 level, so heading level 1, we put within our H1 tags. That's going to be our biggest one. So that would be like what we'd say like an A heading. Then we go down to H2, gets a little bit smaller. So because those could be like a B heading. And then so on, you know, you go down all the way to H6, which is kind of the smallest one. And so this is kind of, we use this to kind of organize the content within our web pages, right? So, and then what we can do when we get a little bit deeper into some of this, when we start working with the cascading style sheets, CSS, we can start applying different fonts and different sizes, specific sizes and colors and things like that to these different headings, okay? But if you type this in just like it is, right, just the basic form like this, the browser does know that an H1 heading is going to be the largest, and so it's going to display that larger than anything that it reads as an H2 or H3, so on. So there's some of this that's standards that are kind of built in right into the code that the browser understands. All right, so those were headings. The next one here is a paragraph element. Okay, so we use the P. Okay, we use the P tag here to put all of our paragraph. So you can think of the paragraph element as kind of like your main text of the site. This is where we're going to group sentences and you know different sections of that text together into these paragraph elements, right? And so it uses by default a block display, configures the empty space above and below that paragraph element. So it's going to add a little bit of space before and after, or above and below that element. Next one here that we use quite a bit is a line break. Okay, so let's just think about like if you're in Word and you hit the Enter return key on the keyboard, it takes you to the next line to start like a new paragraph or a new sentence. We do this in HTML by using the BR tag. So we use our little brackets there. We put the B and the R characters in there, and that lets us know, or lets the browser know that anything that goes after that is going to start on a new line right below it. Okay, so it's kind of like a hard return. Block quote elements, this is something that you might use quite a bit. That just indents the text for like if you want to emphasize something, it's going to do kind of like a little indent to the right. Okay, so you can see there we just use the terminology block quote within our brackets. So an opening and closing tag, and then all the text that's in there. It's going to indent it, and again, it's also going to add some space above and below that element as well. All right, so these are some additional phrase elements that you might use. For example, B, the B element there, any text that's like if we use a opening tag with the B and then the closing tag, you know, where we add the little backslash right before the B, anything between those two tags is going to be bolded. Okay. Emphasize text, that's going to do kind of the same as italicized. It's usually the browser is usually going to display that text in italics. Again, same thing with the I, italicized. If we wanted to make text maybe something a little bit smaller, for example, like fine print or legal disclaimer, something like that at the bottom of the page, we could put that text within the small tags there. Strong, that's going to basically kind of make it bold, so kind of the opposite of small. And we can also use subscript and superscript elements to apply those effects, kind of same as like what you would do in like Microsoft Word. It will take that text and either subscript it or superscript it. All right, so these are things that you might use from time to time. So when we're doing this, though, we need to make sure that we're what we call nesting. We're doing some proper nesting of this. So if we wanted to have, say, something in italics, and we want to have like a phone number that's bolded, I mean, you can kind of see there in the bottom how the browser would display that. To get it to look like that, right above there, the code, that's how we would do it. So the first part, everything is going to be within our paragraph element, so our P tags. And then we want the whole thing to be italicized. Okay, so we're going to put a opening I and a closing I tag at the beginning and at the very end of that text. And then we want just the phone number by itself to be kind of bolded. Okay, so right after, or actually right before the start of the phone number, that first 8, we're going to add in the opening tag, the opening strong tag, and then at the very end of that number, so right after that last 5, is where we're going to add that closing strong tag. Okay, and then if we do it that way, it will pull up, the browser will pull up that text and display it like you see there right below. All right. Something else that you'll use a lot in coding web pages, and this is just kind of mainly because of the nature of web pages. You see a lot of lists, kind of like bulleted lists or numbered lists, things like that within the text of web pages, because we don't, when you write content for a website, it's kind of different than writing for like a book or a magazine or something like that. You really want to display the information in something that's really easy and quick for the viewer to process. So that's why we'll use a lot of lists like this, like bulleted lists and web design. And so there's different ways that we can do that. The first one here is what we call like an unordered list. Okay, so like I said, a bulleted list is going to put the little bullets there before each line of content. And in order to do that, we're going to use a UL tag, which the UL just stands for unordered list. And then if we use the LI tag, that's for an ordered list, okay? So ordered list is actually going to put everything in a specific order and number it for us. So let's take a look at that. All right, so here's an example of the code for an unordered list. We start out with that first line with our opening UL tag, put our UL within our little brackets there, and then we'll bump to the next line to start our list. And so we want like these different lines of text to have a bullet before them. So for each line, we're going to put the text, we're going to nest it inside of the LI. So the one thing to that you want to make sure that you're using the proper tags here. So we got LI, TCP, and then our closing LI tag. And then again, for the next three there, we do that. So we put each one on a separate line. And then the very last line there, we use our closing tag for that unordered list. So we add our backslash there. And then when it displays on the browser, it's going to look like it does there on the right. It's going to add those little bullets to our text. All right, so unordered list is basically this, pretty much the same thing, except it's going to add like a numbering, like add numerals or letters to our list. And we can, again, style this using CSS later down the road. We'll get into that. But an ordered list is going to use OL instead of UL. Okay, so again, just stands for ordered list. And within that OL nesting of the tags, we're going to use the same thing. We're going to use the LI for each item. All right, so this is another example. So this would be like if there's certain steps that you want somebody to follow, you would use the ordered list. And formatting wise, it's pretty much exactly the same as the other one. It's just that we're using the OL tags instead of the UL. For each item though, we're still using that same LI tag. It's just that the browser knows when it's reading through the code, it starts at the very top of your page and goes down. So when it hits that OL, it knows that each of those list items needs to be displayed as a numbered list. All right. Okay, the last type of list here that you'll use, you might use this sometimes, is a description list. Okay, so this would be if you're wanting to list something that contains a little more text, maybe like a frequently asked question part of a page, or something that has definitions or terms, descriptions, something like that, where you have more than just you know, a few characters or just like one line. You might have to have like a couple sentences or something. You can use a description list. And so there's basically three parts of this type of list. There's the DL tag. That's contains everything. So kind of think of your DL as the overarching part of the nest. DT, this contains like our terms or maybe like the headings, and it's going to put some space above and below that. And then our DD tag, that's where we actually put in the description, like our sentences and things like that. So to see this a little better, let's look at this example here. All right, so what we want is we want the browser to display, like there on the bottom right, that IP, which stands for Internet Protocol, and then TCP, which stands for Transmission Control Protocol. So we want the browser to kind of display it like that, to where it's kind of a description of each of those terms. All right, so to get it to do that, we just use this DL element. Okay, so we have our opening DL tag. And then for our first one, so our first, we could call it like our first subject, we're going to do IP. Okay, so we want that. The one thing, how I usually think of it is DT as our description title. So like the title of each one. So that'll, if you just kind of think of it as description title, those are like our headings there. So IP, and then below that, we want the definition of that. So then we use our DD tag, and then for me, an easy way to remember that is just think of DD as like your description details. Okay, so the details of the title. And then, so then we want the next one there, TCP, to go back to the left again. So we do DT and then our TCP in between those tags. And then the DD stands for Transmission Control Protocol. All right, so, and then what we can do, keep mentioning this, really the power of CSS when we get into that, is then we can add like a bolder, bigger font size for the IP and the TCP. So we can tell it that we want those DT elements to be bigger and bolder. And then we can tell it we want the DD elements there to maybe be smaller or italicized or a different color or something like that. All right, so we've talked about the headings, we've talked about lists, block quotes. So let's get into some of these special characters that you're probably going to use quite a bit. The main one being the ampersand there. But a lot of characters, if we want them to display correctly on the browser, we have to code them a little bit differently. Okay, so for example, if we want the copyright symbol there, usually on the keyboard, you would just, I forget which, is it like Alt C or something like that, you would type on the keyboard. When we're doing HTML code, we can't do it directly like that into our code. We have to do like what we call our kind of our special character code. And to do any special character, they're always going to start with the ampersand. And then for example, the copyright, we'd have to do ampersand copyright. And then all of those special characters are always going to end with a semicolon. Okay. So, so like I said, the ampersand is going to be the one that's used the most, just because we use ampersands and as a replacement for the word and in a lot of text. So we can't just type just the ampersand within our HTML. We have to type, which seems kind of redundant, but we have to do ampersand and then AMP and then our semicolon after that. The bottom one there is space. If we want to add extra spaces to like our text, so for some reason you wanted a bunch of space after a sentence or something, you can do ampersand NBSP semicolon, and it's going to add a space in there. You can't just hit the space bar and get that to show up correctly. All right, so if you Google HTML special characters, there's a lot of different sites out there where you can download kind of like cheat sheets for any kind of special character that you might need to display. So there's a lot of resources out there for those. But primarily the ones that I think we'll use mostly in our practice activities are going to be like the ampersand or the space. All right, so the next one is our div element. Okay, so we're going to use this quite a bit in our pages that we code. This div element is basically we're configuring a division, so like a certain block or a certain area on our web page that we want to have space above and below it. So these div elements, they can contain other block display elements, including other div elements. So a lot of times we're going to nest smaller divs within larger divs, and that's pretty common. It's kind of a common thing that you'll come across when we're working on our web pages, is we might have multiple smaller divs within nested with inside bigger div areas. Okay, so but just kind of think of div elements as like if you're sketching out a web page, you're kind of breaking the area of the page up into different blocks. Okay, so these div elements are those different block areas of the page. All right, so this this here shows basically kind of that structural element of a site. And so this is something to really pay attention to. You might want to print this off and kind of have it handy because all of the pages that we're going to design, we're going to use this type of structure. And it's just good practice to do this. It's kind of a common standard to design our web pages like this. So the top part is going to be our header. And so we don't want to, the main thing here, don't confuse header with head. So our head element, our head section of our web page is where we're containing like our title and all that informational data, right? So all of our head, all the content or the code that's inside the head, it's not going to show up on our page. That's just it's just telling the browser like, you know, what language is this going to be used? What's the title of the page? Things like that. The header element, that's an actual visual element that we're going to use. And so this kind of, think of it as like kind of the top part of our web page. A lot of times we'll put the logo of a company inside the header section. We'll maybe have kind of a colored band or bar that goes across there with the logo. So it kind of sets it off as, you know, this, you know, a lot of times it's for branding purposes. Like if we have Nike or Samsung or whatever, we're going to have that header section to kind of let the user know that you're within the Nike or Samsung part of the site. And so then we have our nav element. Usually most of the time that's going to go right below the header, or it might go to the left if we're doing a vertical nav. But that's going to have like our links for all the different parts of our site. Okay, so like an about, contact us, if we're selling something, catalog. So all the different links that take us to different parts of the site, we're going to put inside of a nav element. Then the next one there is our main element. So you can kind of think of this as like the main section of the site. We're going to have maybe multiple divs, like I said, inside the main section. So this is kind of, think of this as like your main body of the site. And then the last one there is the footer element. So a lot of times you'll see like a phone number, email address, physical address, contact, copyright information, things like that will usually go in the footer part of the page. All right, and so all of those different elements there, so like the header, nav, main, footer, all of those are going to be nested inside the body. So remember when we first started, we had a body section there. All of those are going to be inside of the body. And each of those are going to have an opening and a closing tag, just like our body has an opening and a closing tag. Okay, so there on the right, you'll see it's kind of a real simple example of the body there. We have Trillium Media Design up there at the very top. So that's in our header section. Then we have home, services, and contact. Kind of see the links there. Underlined, those are going to be in our nav section. And then we get into the main section of the site where we have like new media, web design, and then some text. So that's probably like an H1 or an H2 header with a paragraph element. And then at the very bottom in our footer section, we have like our copyright information. A lot of times we'll put like a email us or an email address down there as well. All right. So the next thing that you're going to use quite a bit is what we call our anchor element. Okay, and so this is how we are linking to different pages and different, maybe even different URLs to a third-party website that maybe we're linking to outside of our site, we're going to use an anchor element to tell the browser where to go. Okay, so this specifies a specific hyperlink reference to a file. So you just think about hyperlink reference. The short code for that is href. And the text in between our opening A and our closing A is going to be displayed on that page. All right, so let's take a look here at the code. It's in bold there. So say example, we want to have some text display on our page that says contact us. We want to turn that into a link to where when they click on that, it's going to take them to the contact web page of the site. So to do that, we're going to use our opening bracket there, and then we have A, and then we always put a space after the A, and we type href, so that stands for our hyperlink reference. After that, we're going to use equals. Okay, so right after that equal sign is where we need to tell it where to go, or what file, what HTML file, or if it's a URL, you could have the full URL placed inside of those the parentheses there. So we put that within the parentheses. So this one we're doing contact.html. So it's going to let the browser know that that's the page we need to go to. And then right after that last parentheses there, we close that first A element off with our closing bracket. And then we want it to display some text on the browser to know, this is what we have to click on. So then we type out contact us. And then right after that, we use our closing closing anchor element tag. All right. So we'll get a lot of practice with this when we do our hands-on activities. So there's a couple of different types of these links. Like I said, we could link to a specific URL that goes to a different website. That's what we call an absolute link. Okay, so that's where we're typing out the complete URL address. So the example there is if you wanted to go to Yahoo, you would, within the parentheses there, type out the full HTTP ://yahoo.com. And when you click on that, it's going to take you to that URL. Or most commonly, what we're going to do when we're working all of our pages within our own site is we're just going to let it know that we want to go to a certain file or certain HTML file. And so we're going to just put the name of that file within the parentheses there. Okay, so for example, this one, when we click on home, when it takes us, we want it to go to the home page. We're going to tell it that it needs to pull up index.html or index.html. The other one that we'll use, you'll probably come across quite a bit, is linking to email addresses. All right. So again, it's kind of the same principle here as with the anchor tag to it, or anchor element for a URL. The only thing different here is within those parentheses for the href, we're going to type. So for example, if the email address is me@gmail.com, we're going to put in mail to : okay, so you'll always need to have that part, the mail to, and then the colon, and then you put the email address, so me@gmail.com, and you put those inside the parentheses there. You close off that first, the opening A tag, and then remember, we have to have it display something on the page, so then we type me@gmail.com, and so that's the text that's going to be underlined and that we're going to make it clickable. And then we have the closing A tag right after that. Okay. So the main part here to remember is just that mail to : and then the email address. We always need to have that. All right, so we talked about special characters, absolute and relative links. Okay. All right, the last thing here is something that you're going to do pretty much for all of your pages that you're going to work on is we want to make sure that our HTML code is valid. Okay, so there's a website that you're going to use throughout the semester. It's right there. It's http validator.w3.org. And let me see if I can just pull up that site here. What this is going to do is it's going to check the it's going to check through your code, make sure that everything's nested properly. You know, all of your code, there's no errors or anything like that. So you can do it by URL. You can put the address in there, or what you guys will be doing for the most part is probably uploading a file. So we can click on that tab there, validate by file upload. You'll upload your file and then you'll check it, and what it'll do is spit out a report for you. Okay, so I'm not going to run anything right now, but when we get coding on stuff on Wednesday, we'll do this. All right, I think that's it. Yep. Okay. So what I covered there is pretty much all the content there in chapter 2 that you'll go over when you do the quiz, when you do the quizzes for this week. You can refer to that PowerPoint. I have that uploaded in Canvas as well as the book. You can go through that as well. All right, so let's see how much time. We don't have much time left here. One thing I want to know real quick is, and if you could use the chat feature for this, I want you to type what kind of computer you're using, whether you're using a Windows or a Mac or maybe a Chromebook. So if you could type that in real quick, I just want to see what everybody's using. Okay, Windows. Got a couple of Macs, 3 Macs. All right. Okay. All right, so looks like the majority of people are using Windows, which is pretty common. So what I'll probably do when I do the hands-on assignments, I'll go through, I'll use a Windows machine when I do that for the first time. I'll also use the Mac as well. I'll put some videos on there to show you how to do everything with the Mac, because there's a certain process that we'll do when we do the hands-on activities, as far as like downloading the starter files and then unzipping them and uploading them back into Canvas. So there's like a certain process that we'll go through. But I will make sure that I show you how to do both Windows and Mac on that. So we'll do that on Wednesday. But I just wanted to get a quick look here. So I usually use Mac just because I do a lot of digital media design and stuff like that as well. So I have a Mac with me most of the time, but one thing I would say is it's good to know both, have a little experience with both operating systems. So, but like I said, you'll need to make sure you have brackets, the program brackets installed on your machine. And let me pull that up real quick. I'll just go to their website. Put this down. So if you just go to brackets.io, just type that into your browser. There's other ones out there. This is the one that I'll be using in class, just because it's for a lot of beginners. This one works really well as far as the way it displays your code. and the interface. So you can make sure you download this. Like I said, it works. You can download for Mac and for Windows. Other options out there, of course, you can always use like a basic text editor, like a notepad or something like that. When you get a little more advanced, we'll use like Microsoft Visual Studio or maybe Adobe Dreamweaver, some programs like that. So, but as you get better and more familiar with the code, you'll probably find an application that you like to use, and you can stick with that. All right. Okay, so any questions, maybe any questions on anything that we went over in the PowerPoints today? No. Okay. All right. Well, Wednesday. So what I'm going to do Wednesday is I'm going to start going through those hands-on activities. So the coding assignments. I'm going to go over those live. So I know it'll be hard to kind of work along with me unless you maybe have like a couple of two displays. One thing you could do if you wanted to is pull up, if you have a decent sized phone or a tablet or something, you could pull up the Zoom on that and then try to code along on your laptop or your desktop. But we'll get started on doing the code on Wednesday. So looking forward to getting into that. Alrighty, that's all I got for today. You guys have a good day, and we'll see you all on Wednesday on Zoom.